Welcome to episode 178 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode is brought to your friends over at Humanidei. Humanidei helps credit unions build inclusive cultures that attract, develop, and retain talent. Today, I get to have a conversation with Linda Armyn. Linda is the president and CEO of Bethpage FCU in New York. And with that, let's just jump right in. Welcome to the show, Linda. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Randy. So happy to be here.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. For the folks out there who don't know you, and I guess for all of us, can you give us a little background? How'd the career start? Most of us didn't grow up saying someday I want to work in credit unions when we were kids. So, but we all got here and we love it. So where'd your career start? How did that lead you to where you are today?
I took a really windy path, which I guess is how most people's careers started. So it's funny. I may be we should check and see how many CEOs started out as an English literature major. So I was an English communications major with a minor in political science at the University of Maryland, go Terps. And I wanted to be a press secretary on Capitol Hill. I wanted to work in Washington. I was very wise-eyed open. I really wanted to do that until I got there. And I interned for about 2 years and realized, oh my God, this is not what I want to do. But I did love journalism and I did love communicating. And then I did a small stint in the restaurant business, managing for a chain where I learned a lot, actually. Went through a really solid leadership program and then realized, no, that is not what I want to do. And I ended up in the Bank of New York management training program where you literally train to be a leader for 2 years. I'm not sure the program exists anymore. I think they had sunsetted it a while back, but it was a truly great program. And I really learned the ins and outs of banking. And I kind of found my home, but I was always curious. I wanted to always do different things in banking, right? Not just your straight up branch banking or any. So that program let me see every department in the institution. Like I literally spent time in every single department and got to learn the stuff that I loved and the stuff that I think is really great and other people need to do it.
You need them on the team.
100%. So that was a really great experience. And then I ended up going to a European American bank that was a great community institution in the New York region, really friendly community bank. And that was actually between Bank of New York and EAB is where I kind of learned about credit unions. It's a funny story, actually, that I will tell you. So I really started to love that whole community banking atmosphere. And then EAB got bought by Citibank, and just cultural differences where my job was going to be heading. I decided to be open to opportunities. And that's when I found Bethpage Federal Credit Union. And I've been there ever since, 22 and a half years. And needless to say, I'm in love with the credit union industry and I really, really enjoy it so much and all that we do and what we stand for that I can't imagine wanting to do anything else. And I use those English and government relations skills that I learned early on in college every day.
Every single day, I'm sure. Yeah. You mentioned the training program back earlier in your career where you were able to see all the different aspects of banking. You've been, I apologize if I'm wrong on this, but you've been the CEO now since August? Now that you are in the CEO chair, does, having that, even if it was, early in the career, but having that experience across multiple departments that you are now leading all of them, right? Like, can you look back and see that experience has helped you or?
Yeah, it has a lot. So that was my early introduction into teamwork, right? And how important, I'm a big believer in it takes a village. When I became CEO, I say it so much that the facilities department made a sign and it's hanging in my office that says it takes a village because I truly live it and breathe it every day. But that's where I really learned how everybody adds to the pie, right? So you can't make a pie without a lot of great ingredients. And there's so many aspects to banking and every single person, every single department contributes. So getting that high level lens into, every single department, understanding how decisions are made, understanding how departments interrelate with each other and how sometimes some departments need to be more prevalent than others, right? And then at other times, Some other departments then need to kick in a little bit more depending on what's happening in the marketplace. Sometimes, you need that balance. You always need the balance, right? But it's the shifting of the balance and shifting of the priorities that you need to understand the inner workings of every single component of it. And some of it we don't even do. I don't have a trusts and estate department, but I learned a lot about what I need to understand about helping our members, especially members that are more senior or family transitions. I harken back to the days that I spent and the time that I spent in trust and estates, right? But so it all adds to your bank of knowledge. And, I always say I don't know everything, but I know how to ask the right questions and to get to the right places.
the asking the right questions is such an important skill to have. So a question for you. It's still fairly new in the role as CEO, and there are a lot of folks that listen to the podcast who might someday like to be in that CEO chair. A couple of questions there. You mentioned 20 years plus at Bethpage. Was there a point that you were like, you know what? I think I'd like to be a CEO, that, like that was a career goal. And, in August or leading up to August, when that decision was made, what kind of thought process did you have going into taking on the role and the responsibility?
Yeah, it's funny. It's always been in the back of my mind. What do I want to do? Do I want to, you get to a certain point in your career and you start asking yourself those questions. Do I aspire to be the CEO? There were point in times in my career where I really aspired to consultancy. Like, I want to be a consultant. And I think that has a lot to do with my journey, right? Because I worked my way up through, business development and strategy. And I spent a lot of time in strategy. And I think the more time I spent in strategy, that's when I started thinking, I don't know if I want to be a CEO. Maybe I want to be a consultant, because I really enjoyed that work quite a bit. And then the pandemic hit. And I will tell you, there were definitely times throughout my career where I said, I started taking classes and I would sit down and say, I really want to, think about what would the path to CEO be? What skills do I need to hone in on? And I was always working on those things. But I never really said to myself, yeah, I really want to do this definitively. And then the pandemic hit and I was leading a lot of our crisis planning work, and myself and a few of our senior leaders formed a team where we were really being able to manage our CEO at the time, not manage, advise, right? Give advice, but put together real concrete plans of moving everybody out, getting the business continuity up and running, following the crisis plans that we had worked on for so many years and tested, and really experimenting, right? What works, what doesn't work, learning how to pivot fast. We made some bad decisions and we were like, we gave the phone numbers out to all the branches when the branches had to close in New York. And then people were like calling us from outside, let me in, and, crazy stuff, right? So we were like, no, pull those phone numbers back, right? But you don't think about the unintended consequences. You're trying to solve for a problem, right?
Right.
And so learning that even in times of crisis or times where uncertainty, how do you make the best decision at the time, but how do you learn quickly from it, pivot, bring it back if you have to, or double down on it if it's something that's really working well. But getting that bird's eye lens into the whole organization again, where I really was taking a deep dive into all the things that were happening and how do we optimize the organization the best that we can, and working with the leadership team to really make sure that we were serving our members and making sure that our employees were having a good experience in a tough situation, and how do you make the best for everybody, right? So going through that experience and leading a lot of that work put in my head like, hey, I think I want to do this. I think I really want to give it an effort. And if I can earn this job, I want to do it. And so that was kind of a defining moment where I guess I had a lot of time on my hands to think about it. And I had really, taken a good hard look at the organization in totality. And I had a conversation with my CEO and said, I want to train for this, one day when I want to be able to put my hat in the ring and really be considered. And that's when the succession planning conversation started to, become real. And that's when I really started focusing on the things that I needed to do to ready me the best that you can, right? Because you're never fully ready. I keep saying to everybody, if you don't have a pinch me moment every once in a while, then maybe you should not, you should continue to learn more and want to do something, aspire for something else, because you're always learning, you're always doing something. And there's a lot of times where I go, am I really sitting in this seat? And I'm still new. So I'm going to still have a lot of those pinch me moments, but I think they're important in every stage of your career.
Let me ask you this, just because you talked about being new and like that idea that it's not like you can prepare for everything, that the CEO role is a much, I feel like, different role than others in the organization. You have your entire team. You all of a sudden have a bunch of bosses above you, your whole board.
I would suggest you have a bunch of bosses below you too.
Below you too, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's a very interesting role in any organization. Like from conversations with friends as they became CEOs for the first time, often it was even if they had been in a lot of board meetings, it was like the actual relationship. So again, is there anything while it's fresh that you're like, okay, next first time CEO, they're listening today. What's that piece of advice, or maybe that's something that you wish you would have known or done better?
So I'll be honest with you, that wasn't it for me. But so I've always, because of my strategy role, I've developed really strong relationships with the board over the years, which is why I think they entrusted in me, the organization, when it was time, right? Because they knew me, they've seen my work product, my work ethic, my beliefs and value systems in the credit union. I really helped in all aspects of the credit union, but I had really strong relationships with the board from just interacting with them, through strategy and being on the senior leadership team. So, don't get me wrong, the first time you're in the board meeting and it's the board meeting that you're, your first CEO board meeting, you definitely have those moments where you're like, okay, I need this to go a certain way. But I'm really an open communicator. I'm really transparent. I feel that the board is your advisors. You have all these volunteer board members that give you a significant amount of time from their lives, and we need to leverage their strengths. They're a part of the team. Like I said, I always say it takes a village, and the board's very much a part of our village. So I embrace them. I really seek their counsel, and I try to treat them as if they're a part of the team. So that, and it goes a long way, right? And try to make the board meetings less of a readout and more of a conversation. Necessary readouts, but where can we glean from their advice and counsel? So that's something that I've tried to do, and it's going over very well with the board. They really enjoy the conversation. They enjoy being able to give their feedback and just fostering my entire team, right? So we bring a group of our senior leaders to every board meeting, whether they're presenting or not, because I encourage them all to meet with the board and have lunches with the board members so that they can build those same relationships, because I think it's so important. But the thing, getting back to your actual question, the thing that was different when I said to you, I joked and said, I would suggest you have a lot of bosses underneath you. I spent a lot of my career advising, right? Because I was in a strategy role, I was in a senior leadership role. So I spent a lot of time advising and making things happen, taking a leadership role at a different level, but really driving things forward and making things happen. So now I'm sitting in the seat where I'm the advised. And that's probably the most interesting piece of it, right? Because when you go from advisor to advisee and you have to make those final decisions, it's not about making a decision in the way you in your head would have advised if you were the advisor, right? Right. Yeah. You have to take in all of the advice, and it's different advice than maybe you would have given, because at any given time, you have multiple senior leaders giving you different opinions. So It's how do you take your opinion and put it on the back burner and then accept all the feedback and actually hear what people are saying, right? So I always say to the team, if you're thinking about what you're going to say as the person speaking, then you're not hearing them. And I would suggest you're not even listening. So it's about truly listening, hearing people, pausing, and then being able to give yourself time to think about it and make the right decision. And sometimes that might be, okay, I hear what everybody's saying. I want to sleep on this and I'll get back to you, unless it has to be a split decision. And then that's a whole nother story. But I think it's all about flipping that switch, which I was not, that's something that over my career, I was a person that would think about what I was going to say as a person. And I learned over time about listening and hearing people. and that there's truly a difference. And that's something that in the last few years, I've been really trying to hone and continue to hone every single day. Because the worst is when you grow up being the fixed, type of person that's going in and fixing things or going in and making things happen. And now all of a sudden you need everybody else to be doing that and you not doing that. It's so hard. You want to just jump in and roll your sleeves up and say, let me do this, but you can't. That's probably the hardest adjustment.
We're, 170 some episodes in, and I think you're the first person that really dug into that side of it. But most of us, as we kind of rise up in an organization to get to that senior level, it's because we've been pretty good at getting the work done or whatever. Like you've mentioned multiple different departments, but your department was probably doing very well as the more tactician. Now you're sitting there like, oh boy, I'm not supposed to be the expert anymore in all of these.
Well, it's really funny because I say, oh, my people. And then I'm like, wait a minute, they're not my people now. Everybody's my people. So now I'm like, okay, my OG people.
Right. That's the group that you came up with, right? So let's talk a little bit about credit unions. I know you're involved and have been, and you've talked about like some of the development work you've done and things like that in the past. When we look at credit unions, we'll start on the one side, then we're going to flip this completely over and have a little fun with it. But like, what do you see as the biggest challenges we're facing as a movement today?
I think it's the same challenges that we're facing individually as in an organization. I think sometimes we can't get out of our own way.
I need more.
So as an industry, we know that we wear the white hats and that we're the good guys and that we try to always do what's best for our membership. But we don't always tell our story the right way, and we don't always articulate that. Or we believe the mantra that we're the good guys and we wear the white hats, but we don't always, and quite frankly, we can't always do that, right? We have to run a business and we have to balance the dollars and cents of it all and balance being the good guys and offering the best rates and offering the best solutions and serving everybody. And it's a juggling act and a balancing act. And we have to stay within the highly regulated lines, but we also have to be innovative and think about how can we do things differently because, what we did in the past might not take us forward, right? So how do we continue to learn, grow, collaborate as an industry? How do we continue to learn, grow, collaborate as an organization? And how do those organizations work together to continue to move not only the individual credit unions forward, but together as an industry? And, it's hard with prolonged inverted yield curves and challenging market conditions and pandemics and everything that goes on. There's a lot coming at all of us, right? Yeah. So how do we say to ourselves, as a financial services industry, these are the things we have to stick together on. We probably have, this is going to sound like politics, but we probably have more in common with the banks than we care to admit. How do we come together as an industry to say, these are the things that we really need to fight for? And then how do we say, credit unions serve a really distinct purpose. We add a lot of value to a lot of people, and we need to keep our structure and our integrity intact. So how do you do that at the same time? It doesn't mean that we're going into enemy territory when we agree with banks. There's right. Times we need to do that, but there's also times where banks need to recognize that credit unions, just like community banks, just like commercial banks, all serve a purpose, and we all benefit from each other. And we need to learn from each other, but we need to learn when to walk together and when we need to maybe say, hey, why don't you see my side of it? I know it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys, and we try to make all that what it is. But if truly at the end of the day, we want to help people, and credit unions do, right? That I truly wholeheartedly believe in people helping people, and we're not all for the shareholders. So I believe that. I get that. I think we just have to open our thoughts to say, where is it that we really hunker down and get our movement shining as the star that we are, so that we can carry that torch forward and say we're relevant to the financial services industry. And if we went away tomorrow, people would miss us. And I say that about Bethpage, right? If Bethpage went away tomorrow, would people in the community miss us and all the great work that we do? And would our members miss us? And I believe the answer to that is yes. And I believe that if the credit union industry went away tomorrow, people would miss us. I believe we really add a lot of value to the consumer. So how do we maintain our foothold in the financial services industry that's rapidly changing?
Very fast. Yeah.
Very fast. And how do we leverage the best of other pieces of that pie so that everybody can kind of move forward? And that's the tough part.
What has you most excited that Bethpage is working on for the future or the industry overall in credit unions?
I am excited about a lot of things. I really am. And I'm nervous about a lot of things, right? Because we're in some interesting times. We have a charter that we can utilize throughout the country, and we're experimenting with ways to better utilize that charter, right? And how do we look to preserve our legacy markets and double down on them in some aspects, right? And really be true to who we are and how we started. And we love the New York metropolitan area. And there's so much business here and so many members we can serve and communities we can help build up. So how do we continue to do that? But also in a direct way, also branch out into other parts of the country and other places where the Bethpage value would be appreciated and it would resonate. So we're starting to do that through some digital and virtual banking. From the pandemic, a lot of us, got real used to Zoom, and our virtual branch is probably one of the most popular things we launched since the pandemic, and the members love it. And we could continue to keep growing that branch because we can serve people all over anywhere, right? People like you're not up in the Northeast right now because it's snowing.
It's too cold for me there. I had to leave, Linda.
But you could still be a member and we can have a banking conversation. And unless, with the exception of cash, there's a lot you can do virtually. So we embrace that and our members love us for it, right? We're taking a look at our brand. We're saying, hey, is this the brand that's going to take us the next 80 years forward? Yeah. And really, how are we telling our story? How are we telling our message? Because it's one thing to just say, oh, we're a credit union, we're great. Kind of goes back to what I was saying, right? Drinking our own Kool-Aid. But what is it that truly defines us? And understanding that, what is the value we truly add? What is it that makes us relevant that people would miss us if we left? So we're working with an agency and really taking a look at what is the story we need to tell. So whether or not we're looking at our name or our colors and taglines, that is irrelevant at this point. It's possible, right? But truly, who are we? Taking that really fresh look and saying, who do we want to be? And more importantly, who do our members want us to be? And how do we tell that story to people that, aren't from this area, that haven't seen us over the last 80 years? So that's the fun part.
I've said for years, I think we are way too modest and we do a terrible job of telling our story. So,
and we've tried, to give everybody credit, right? We've tried as an industry. We've tried as individual credit unions, as regional credit unions. But it's hard. It's hard. It's very hard to be one size fits all. It's very hard to come together and really break through.
In so many of the, whether it's fintechs or just other financial services providers have really attached to our story, so our story doesn't sound as unique anymore. So it's we do have to, I absolutely love what you're doing.
But you know what? We can't begrudge it either.
No,
a lot of times I see, we have to stop the post office from opening accounts for people. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, if there are people that don't live near a credit union and don't know about a credit union, we have to do our best to get to everybody and tell our story. But if somebody's going to be able to open a savings account at a post office, which, whether or not that really happens or not. But if that means that somebody's going to be banked and have a safer relationship with their money, then so be it. I mean, I'm sure that's not a popular thing for me to say. I don't want to always be the one saying, well, not them, because we don't like it when the banks say not credit unions.
Right.
So I think, like I said, I think everybody serves a purpose. We have to be doing our job. We have to be the best credit unions we can be so that people choose us versus trying to get rid of everybody else.
There is plenty of market share out there for us to go after.
100%.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit, kind of pivot back a little bit about your leadership journey. Who does Linda surround herself with? Have you had like the mentors along the way? Do you have the people that, like, I think back to early CUInsight when we were starting this, many of the ideas, people would be like, that's amazing. But there were a few people who I'd say, they'd look at me and they go, why would you do that? And then it was like, I needed that, like, pushback at times, right? Like everything couldn't be unicorns and rainbows, right? Have you had mentors along the way that have helped you? What does that group look like that you bounce things off of when you really need a fresh eyes on something? Maybe?
Yeah, it's funny. Mentorship has always been something that has been really important to me. I mentor a lot of people. And I have been mentored by many people. And throughout my entire life, I've always kind of, when I was in high school, my journalism teacher was probably one of my biggest mentors at the time and helped me to think things through. Something my dad taught me early on was, to really seek counsel from other people that might know something or know something differently than you do. So it's always been really important to me. And I have several local people, from the woman that owns our PR firm, who has really been wonderful in counseling me on certain aspects of my career, and friends and family members, prior bosses, members of our board I seek counsel to. I have a coach that I've been working with for many years, who obviously that's a professional relationship, but it's really over time provided a lot of different objective insights, where people aren't always telling me what I want to hear, right? I don't want people to tell me what I want to hear. I want people to push me to be better, or to tell me where I'm doing really well. And maybe this is where you want to shift your focus. What I don't like is when people try to shape people into who they're not, right? So authenticity is a big piece of this. And there's a difference between leveraging your strengths and being your best person versus twisting and turning to be who somebody else wants you to be. And that's when I think you have to have those inflection points to say, this is who I am. This is my style. This is how I lead. Do you want me to do this? Or if you really want me to change so many things that now I'm not myself anymore, or I'm not true to who I am, then is that really the role for me, right? So it's over the years, I've always had to try and figure that out. And going to objective people for advice and counsel when you're not maybe thinking things through so clearly, or you just need a little extra clarity to say, hey, yeah, you know what? You really are doing a good job. You really are reinforcing the good and maybe giving you perspective to think about how maybe you would want to do things differently. I think it's really important. So I lean into a village of mentors.
Let me ask you, one of the things I've loved about hosting this podcast over the last few years is kind of these, like, just they're scratch my own itch questions, right? Like I just kind of pick into things. A couple of years ago, I heard on a podcast, a different podcast, and they asked Warren Buffett what the greatest investment he ever made in his career was. And he said Dale Carnegie courses. When you think of investments that you've made in your career, is there something that stands out that you're like, I don't think I'd be where I am today without it?
Yeah. So I'm going to go down the Warren Buffett path. Center for Creative Leadership changed my life. And I've told this to them actually, because we use them from time to time for some leadership stuff. But when I was turning 40, I was definitely at an inflection point. I had younger children. My career was really taking off. And my boss had suggested I go to this strategic leader class, and that it was really focused on work-life balance. And it was focused on how do you be a strong leader and also be a strong person in your personal life. And I spent a week really focused in on things I never thought that I needed to think about. And the interesting part of it is I ended up catching pneumonia while I was there. So it was definitely Talk about, a moment of reflection. But I really, it left such an impression on me. And it really made me think about what is it that I want to be as a person? What is it I want to be as a leader? And how do the two mesh together? And I think that was where it was about really understanding. And at the time, I don't think it was the buzzword about being authentic that it is today. But it was truly the story, right? How do you be true to your own values and your own self and then be the best person you can in all of your environments? And that was a real place in my life where I said, hey, this is how I have to look at things differently instead of just running at it 100% all the time. That's where I really learned how to take pauses and to take breaks and to, every once in a while, just reevaluate.
How do you create that space for yourself to reevaluate? Because there's always something on your desk, right?
All day long. And it's not even on my desk anymore. It's in my hand. It's on my wrist. You have to force yourself to do it. You have to really give yourself those times. I kind of like to call it, this is going to sound goofy, but, sweatpant weekends, right? Can you spend an entire weekend in your sweatpants in your house doing things that are just going to give you a minute? Because, like every weekend I'd be doing Now, I'm also an empty nester. I have grown children that relocated to Ohio, so I don't get to dote over them the way I wish I could sometimes. But with that being said, I don't always try to be on the go. I try to give myself a little time and be thoughtful about it. A friend had really convinced me to do meditation. So I do that too. And I find that's like, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes of just being silent is not a bad thing.
Years ago on the podcast, Leo Ordine got me on Insight Timer that I've used for years. And I find when I get away from it, I can tell.
You can tell, right?
That 15 minutes is really healthy for me.
So. It really is. So, those are the times, whether it's taking walks or, I have a rower. I love my time on my rower, just giving myself some moments. And sometimes it's literally doing nothing and just maybe watching some sports or, it doesn't always have to be so deep, but just giving yourself time to think about other things or reading a book. I love reading a lot of different books. So.
Well, we're going to get to that in a second. Before I start moving on too much in here, I wanted to ask you a question about this team that you work for, your leadership team. When you're looking to add to that, is there something that, we talk a lot about culture and, open door policies and all of that, but is there something that you're specifically looking for when you're adding, say, to that team you're surrounding yourself with? And on the flip side, is there something that, like, say, in that interview process that's just oh yeah, nope, you won't fit here, that's a no-go?
So, like I said in the beginning, I'm really team driven. I believe the team is at the center of everything we do. And I really am focusing on everybody understanding that everybody plays a part in the team. And no matter what role you are in the company, you play an important piece, and the team doesn't work without you. So that's the answer for the senior leadership team, right? It's where do I have something missing? Where am I missing a piece of the story? Where am I missing the piece of the pie? So that I know I'm getting the full picture before we're making big decisions about moving a company forward. So if I'm adding somebody to the leadership team, it's about, we're missing a dynamic that we need that's going to make the whole team dynamic be better. How do we continue to be better? Because I really lean into to everybody's individual thoughts and then the collective thought. And I think it's super important that we do that. So I'm not adding people unless it's going to move the dynamic forward. I don't want to add people just because we need to have a certain title in the mix. I think we need to have the right thought leadership in the mix and people that know, like I always say, we can't get out of our own way, but we're a highly regulated industry that needs to stay within the line. So I need the people that are going to put the guardrails up, but I also need the people that are going to want to jump off the cliff to a certain extent to really think about how can we be different and how do they all work together, right? Because sometimes, the guardrail people and the cliff people don't know how to communicate with each other, but how do we make that happen?
Us cliff people sometimes need guardrail people.
100%. I'm one of them. And I really appreciate the guardrail people. I think they play a very important role, and I think everybody plays an important role, and getting everybody to see that. So that's the showstopper, right? If someone comes in and talks about, all the things that they're going to do and doesn't recognize the value of being a part of a team and wanting to contribute to a team. Like, I want people to talk about their strengths and how they're going to do that, but I don't need people coming in and saying, well, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to fix that. And that's the mentality that I don't necessarily want. And it doesn't mean I don't want people to fix things, but I want people to be objective and be parts of a team that together is going to fix things.
Well, let me ask you this. We probably both grew up reading the same management and leadership books, and I think that's kind of, some of them didn't age real well. When you think about what makes a good CEO today, or maybe a leader in general, what would you say to that?
I do think it's about, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I do think it's about people that are willing to evolve, right, as leaders. Because like you said, there's always the book of the day and the fad of the day. But I will tell you one that started early in my career. Actually, this was in the restaurant business. I had a manager say to me, you don't always have to be so tough to be a leader, right? You don't have to tell people what to do and be autocratic, right? And it was from, I want to say, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, right? Where, and how he described it to me is, he said, when you're watching a cartoon and, the Roadrunner hits Bugs Bunny over the head with the frying pan and he crashes down, but then he pops back up and comes back to life. If you keep doing that to people, they might not come back to life one day. They might leave you, right? That was a really interesting analogy for me. And basically what it was is the whole seek to understand. And I think that has lived. Right? Because if you're truly a good leader, and the why is so important, right? So whether it was in the 80s, seek to understand, or in the 90s, it was Simon Sinek with the why. The why is still the why, right? And sometimes you might not be able to make somebody happy about a decision you made, but if you give them the why, if you tell them this is why we have to do this, right? Like, I can't offer the best rates on every single product because I got to pay for it. But what is the why behind some of the decisions that you make? And also bringing people in early, right? Like, everybody wants to complain about legal and compliance and all the guardrail people, right? But if you bring them in early and start the journey together, you don't have the combativeness at the end when they raise the flag, right? So if you're raising the flags along the way and you're taking the journey together, it's a lot more harmonious, right? Versus bringing people in at the last minute that you have to bring in, but you don't really want to hear what they have to say. That's not the way to attack things when you're trying to, move things forward in a highly regulated industry. So, bringing the team together early and often, I think, is really what helps us to do things better. So, and then really being able to, like I keep saying, this goes back to get out of your own way. If I can't explain something, we need to figure out a simpler way to do it. So whether it's an incentive plan or a rule on an account or whatever you're working on, if you can't easily explain it, you probably should be rethinking it. So really understanding the why behind things, I think, is something that has stuck with me. And it's probably been just told in a lot of different ways every decade.
I had an assumption that we were going to have a fun time with this. Just means that we'll have to do it again someday. But before we move on to the rapid fire questions, was there anything you were hoping I was going to ask you that I didn't?
No, I think this has been a great conversation.
Me too. So I could go on. I have a million questions I wanted to ask you that I just don't have the time to, but because this has been so much fun for me. But it wouldn't be the CUInsight experience without a few rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So the questions are rapid. Your answers don't have to be. What was the first job you ever had? Like the very first time you made any money?
I worked for a drugstore chain as a cashier.
There you go. When was the last time, either personally or professionally, you were just amazed with something?
I would say this, when I got promoted, when I took over the CEO job, I was really amazed at the enthusiasm that the team had for me growing up in the organization, for me being the first female CEO of the organization. I had no idea the impact that was going to make on some of the younger female professionals in our organization.
That's pretty cool.
And I was amazed. I really was. Cause like I've always, it was there. It's a fact, right? But
yeah, absolutely.
The fact that it meant so much to so many of the young female professionals, that truly amazed me. And it really warmed my heart, to be honest.
That is beautiful. So one thing I found in myself, many others that I've talked to, is, oftentimes, and we kind of talked about this earlier, when you're coming up in the organization, it is that almost A-type, put your head down, keep going. You've mentioned creating that space. Any other, I guess, like hacks or anything that you could share for creating the full life balance, right? Like the work-life integration, whatever term we want to use.
Yeah, I know. That's another thing that hasn't aged well, right? I had a friend say this to me once because I was really stressed out about, being there for my kids. I'll never forget this. My kids were probably in elementary school and they had to do like a Mother's Day card for me. And my one son, it was like a guess who the mom is. And you had to, write a characteristic about your mom. And like some kids, like my mom watches Oprah all day. And then my son wrote, my mom works at Bethpage Federal Credit Union a lot. And I was like, oh my God. And then my other son wrote me a card about how proud he was of me and that I work so hard at Bethpage Federal Credit Union, but he misses me. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. I had this meltdown. And I remember my friend saying to me, sometimes you got to use your car key as a hack. Right? Back then it wasn't called a hack, but when you put and you can't, this is not realistic for every day, right? But it's a good mindset. Because I'm sure people are going to be like, oh, yeah, sure. If you put your key in the ignition, which I don't even think we do that anymore. So if you hit the button and you're driving to work, you got to try and leave home, right? And when you put the key in the ignition or you hit the button and you're heading home, you got to try and leave a lot of work home so that you can be present. Again, another overused term, but there is something to it. Being with the people you want to be with. There was a song, Love the One You're With, right? I'm sure it doesn't really mean that. But being, where you are at the time and trying to be present in modern day terms is important, right? So when I am with my family and it's an important moment for them, I want to, and me, right? I want to experience the moment. And there's other people that can handle that. And that's the type A personality thing, right? We think, well, we're the only ones that can handle it. So, going through the exercise of putting somebody in charge when you're on a vacation and you really want to spend some time with your family because you don't get to see them very often. Of course you're going to be there and something's going to blow up and they're going to need you and you're going to be there because that's your job, especially as a CEO. It's a 24/7 job. There's no doubt about that. But finding those moments where you can say, okay, they've got this, I can do this. Or the other way around, something's going on at work and the family has to understand, like, I got to be engaged here because we're not doing anything that's critical right now. And I got to be here. So it's just prioritizing and reprioritizing, but giving yourself some grace.
Yeah, a little grace.
A little grace goes a long way.
So what's the greatest album of all time?
So I'm a huge U2 fan. I'm a product of the 80s. So I would tell you the greatest hits of U2 because I just love them and I love all their albums. So, but I'll go with the standard answer, which would be Joshua Tree. However, I'm also a lover of music, right? So when you think back of albums that maybe were in, as growing up, so Michael Jackson's Thriller, right? So, and then, being a musical family, I grew up listening to the Beatles, right? So the White Album is the one that everybody talks about, but, I love all different kinds of music. So I'm a huge music fan. So it's hard for me to say of all time, but, those are the big ones that probably stick out.
This question came from, you mentioned the guardrails and the regulators out there, but this came from NCUA Chairman Harper. Who plays you in the movie biopic of your life?
Oh, wow. I have no idea. Who would play me in a movie? Julia Roberts.
There you go.
And not for any of the reasons that anybody would think.
I feel like you could completely tell the age of all of us, where it's like Julia Roberts, George Clooney, just pick the cast of Ocean's 11. Yeah.
The reason I picked her is because she always portrays women who are strong, but empathetic and caring all at the same time. And that's who I strive to be.
That's a great one. So you mentioned books. What are you currently reading? Anything that you think folks should be reading?
Yeah, so I am really excited about this one book that I actually bought 149 copies of and sent it to our entire management team. And I wrote handwritten notes to all 149 people to let them know that I
so
thought
curious.
This was important. Right. So it's Francis Fry and Ann Morris wrote a book, How to Move Fast and Fix Things. And I bought an early copy of it. I'm fans of theirs. We've done some work with them through Q's with Francis Fry, if people remember some of the classes, if they took them. But this book is really about getting out of your own way, right? And the quick synopsis is you can create a list. Every Monday is going to come around and you can start every Monday something new. And if you create your list and you pick one thing you're going to work on, you can get it completed by Friday, right? And it could be big, but what's the one problem we need to tackle? Figure it out. And then there's a whole process for each day. So I'll leave that up to the people to go listen to the book.
We will link to that in the show notes for sure. And you've added to my list. So.
Everyone I've given it to has enjoyed it and learned some really cool things. And, like I said, I got to do a Zoom with them where they were answering a lot of questions and I had asked a question and they gave me something really great to think about that I challenged the team with. And it stemmed from the question that we talked about earlier about, what is it that your philosophy and teamwork and things like that. But Francis, I had said, how do I stop always trying to fix things as a new CEO? And she said, ask people these 3 questions. What do you do as an individual to be wildly successful? What do you do as a team to be wildly successful? And what do you think Bethpage needs to do to be wildly successful? And then how do the 3 interrelate? And if everybody understands their role and how it rolls up and how it creates that harmony or the great song or the great album of all time, then we're all better for it. And we can get out of our own way if we try, and we can create a list on Monday and get it done by Friday. And the best part of this is she says, somebody asked, well, what do you do on Friday? She said, on Saturday, they said, you rest.
You rest.
Saturday and Sunday is the time where you try and regroup, and then Monday's going to be here before you know it. So I think it's a great book. It's brand new.
We will link to it for sure. And I will be checking that out. Last question for you. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind?
My dad.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, my dad, he passed away prematurely back in the 90s at 42 years old. But one thing that he left with me was that you're going to be a success if every day you wake up and say, I'm going to do something good for somebody or something good. And that has always stuck with me, and that the true definition of success is waking up every day and just doing one thing that's good.
That is the perfect way to wrap this show up. I thank you so much for being here today, Linda, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
I can't wait to do it again and do it in person because there's so much. If people want to get a hold of you, what's your poison? Because I'm sure people are going to have more questions of you, just like I do. LinkedIn, email, what do you like? Yeah,
LinkedIn works. Send me a message. I check it. But yeah, LinkedIn or email me, larmyn@bethpagefcu.com. Pretty easy.
Awesome. We will link to your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. So, and everything else that we talked about. Thank you again for being here today, my friend. And I hope our paths cross again soon. Maybe a Q's event or something.
Yeah, or GAC, something, right?
GAC is coming up quick. That's true.
All right. See you then.
A few things before we go. Make sure to check out our sponsor, Humanidei, in the show notes. Humanidei will help your credit union build an inclusive culture and attract and develop and retain talent. So check them out. They're longtime partners of our show. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all. And if you're looking for one of the books mentioned, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read can be on its way from Amazon or downloaded from Audible like I do most of them. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Be well, friends, and hope to see you all soon.